The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, it is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to Bronx journalists, Bronx writers, and tonight we have two people coming from different worlds. We have the editor of the Norwood News, and we have an author who wrote about the kinds of things that I think Bronx people are going to really be able to relate to. But let's start with my buddy David Cruz, editor of the Norwood News. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Guy. How you doing?
David, the Norwood News is hot right now. You got a lot of good stories, a lot of interesting things. Let's start with one that opened my eyes, and that was the idea of Kingsbridge Road merchants are in jeopardy. They feel like their properties are literally potentially being sold outright from underneath them.
Exactly. So my reporter, Emily Susan Lever, she went out to Kingsbridge and she spoke with the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, and she was told that essentially this giant, massive square block building was up for sale. Meantime, there were already existing commercial tenants, some of whom have been there for years, who are still doing business.
We're talking about across Kingsbridge from the Kingsbridge Armory?
Correct. It's
right, and so that's one building, but there's a whole host
There's
of
a whole
businesses.
strip of businesses over
Right,
there.
Flower shops, there's a deli, there's all
Exactly.
kinds of things in there.
So-
Fruit stands and things like that.
She did verify that it was on LoopNet. It was essentially saying that you can get the storefronts. It'll be vacant by the time you decide to actually go ahead and take over the property. And this is essentially just kind of surprised everyone.
So let's just review it. Number one, they don't have protections because they don't have leases, so there's
Correct.
no legal reason for it. They can be priced out in a half a second. And then the second part of it is it was identified in a Pew Research study that the rents, that they are killing themselves to pay their rents anyway. I guess there's no other way to look at it, but it seems to be a classic case of gentrification.
Yeah, you could definitely call it that. About in the report, it says 89% of the businesses surveyed along Kingsbridge Road are rent burdened, which essentially means that they're a portion of
The rent is too damn high.
Right, a portion of their income, what they get from sales and that sort of thing, is just astronomically high to the point where it's unlivable. And so here you have a situation where a landlord is essentially just trying to oust tenants in the worst possible
It was
way.
not written in the article, but I almost feel like it was almost like the elephant in the room that the prospects of the Kingsbridge Armory across the street being developed, and so whoever manages those properties is saying, you know what, I'd rather not have a fruit stand. I'd rather put in somebody who's can pay a higher rent and maybe a franchise of some sort. I mean, I don't know who.
Well, at this point, I think a landlord just sort of hedging their bets right now.
That's what it
because
would be.
the Armory hasn't even been built. I mean, the Kingsbridge National Ice Center hasn't even been built yet. That thing has not even been touched, and here we are, almost 6 years.
Is it 6 years?
In April?
My
Yeah.
goodness. Wow.
It'll be 6 years in April, where Mayor Bloomberg at the time had announced
Wow.
that the Kingsbridge Armory would be repurposed into an ice center.
That is unbelievable. Just we'll talk a little politics here. On one hand, when the city lost Amazon, many people said it was the same mistake that was made by Borough President Diaz at the Kingsbridge Armory. On the other hand, I know we're going to have the borough president, I mentioned it to you on Bronx Talk, he's going to respond and say, however, because we did that, we got the minimum wage increased.
Right.
And so that's the comeback to say, well, you didn't get that business, but we may have helped people all over the state.
Right. So this is one of the things that Amazon didn't do from the get-go, was sort of at least hint at possibly working with the community in terms of getting a version of a community benefits agreement, just like the Kingsbridge Armory folks had done with the existing community. And so I think that's what sold the community into saying, okay, we accept this ice skating center for it will be.
For me personally, I would say then that is on the governor and mayor for not advocating for that, because in essence the mayor of the Bronx advocated for that when it was time. Just a final word on this particular story. What's the play out for this? There's no response to this. The buildings get sold, they get moved out, and that's the way it is.
Right, and right now we do mention in the article there's no legislative recourse right now
Wow.
with respect to these commercial tenants. It's just capitalism at its worst, at its best.
Well, it is what it is. Let other people evaluate it. Let's talk about, you have been talking to me about the Bronx Buccaneers, and the Bronx Buccaneers have now had good news, right? So who are the Bronx Buccaneers? And give us the story, and the Norwood News has followed it from top to bottom.
Well, just the Bronx Buccaneers is a youth football team in Norwood. They've been playing at Williamsbridge Oval Park for years, and so they had there was a fallout between the team managers and the permit holder of the field. They use it at a prescribed time. It's a prime time to actually get recruits and that sort of thing. The permit holder decided to go with a Manhattan-based team and attempt to try and get the Manhattan-based team to play or to practice in the Bronx.
Is this another case of getting a better price so you move out the Bronx people?
Correct. So
I got to tell you, I didn't like it at Kingsbridge Road, and I really don't like it here. You mean that Bronx kids would lose space in a Bronx park because they're moving another team in?
they would have lost it exactly. And
Wrong.
So the team had reached out to us. We had done the story, and the follow-up is that essentially Councilman Andrew Cohen was able to broker a meeting between the team and the Bronx Parks Department, and they were able to give that team their own permit to play at Williamsbridge Oval Park and essentially rescind the permit for
the Manhattan group.
Group.
So, and how many kids are served by this?
Several
to
dozen.
Me,
I mean,
activities for our young people, things that they like, things that bring their families out. I mean, this is all what my editorial, that's what we got to do. I'm crossing them all off my list. This building, I guess it's on Webster Avenue, that's owned by...
It's a couple buildings, yeah.
A couple of buildings. That there has been all kinds of questions about the building, and you have a story about ongoing dialogue to get the building up to speed. And I have to say, in private conversations we've had, you said, it's not quite clear what's been going on there. So why don't you sort it out for us?
So these...
What's the address of the building?
The three buildings is 2987 through 2999 Webster Avenue.
Webster Avenue.
It's
so that's just north of Bedford Park?
Yeah, it's in Bedford Park, yeah.
In the Bedford Park
area. It's just right next to Bedford Park Boulevard.
Okay.
Buildings were built in 2015 as part of the 2011 rezoning. Those were the first buildings that came from that rezoning. People were expecting families, to sort of occupy these buildings, but since from the beginning it was opened, the building kind of just sort of fell into disrepair. Among the reasons is because, according to tenants anyway, they say that a lot of the mentally ill people are living in these market rate apartments, and they contract them into that building by several nonprofit support service groups. Right. But the problem is that they're not being supervised, any of the residents.
The people themselves,
correct.
The residents, okay.
So the tenants essentially have been just trying to convince the developer, Mark Stagg, of the Stagg Group, to essentially bring in a live-in super, which there was not one, even though apparently they had skirted some of the rules. They were able to just sort of find...
Wait, so here you have a building with how many units? A couple hundred units?
Oh, a couple hundred, yeah.
Right, a couple of hundred units, and they don't have a super...
They don't have a live-in super. They had maintenance services, but they barely did any kind of work.
And what are the rules on that?
Well, the rule is that if you are a building with a certain number of units, you can either have a live-in super, or the super has to live 200 feet from the property. And no one thinks that the existing cleaning crew was actually living in the area.
So did they make accommodations for this? And I know this was, you've got stories about the community board getting involved, the council member got, everybody got involved.
Right.
Where are we at, and what happened?
Well, right now, the good news is that today,
literally today.
Correct. There was the Stagg Group announced that they will now have a live-in super in that property.
Well, so that's good.
That's a really good thing.
That's good.
But it came from intense pressure because these guys, both the tenants, they were not giving up. They really were just trying to get everyone to sort of fight for them.
And you know, I guess it calls into play responsibility by landlords and developers to say, you know what, if you're going to earn the contracts from, you know, various organizations or whatever, you've got to really take care of people who are there so that you can really build a community. There's no reason why any people can't have good homes. I mean, right?
Correct, exactly.
Right. All right, last on my list, and I can't believe we're getting all of it. Usually we don't have time for everything. There's a wonderful relationship between the Norwood News, Bronx Net Television, this television station, and WFUV, that radio station, wherever they are from where we're sitting. And you've been doing series. You did a wonderful series on gangs and fighting gangs. And now the next series is on something, I guess, a little more common, dental work. Tell me about that.
Well, it's
I like this.
the dental work story is part of a 5-part series on just health issues in general happening within the Bronx. We had done one on the financial struggles of paying for insulin, and now this part 2 of 5 is focusing on the importance of dental hygiene, but just not just sort of a rundown of like what you should do, but more what are the ramifications in terms of not having dental work. And apparently there is a social aspect to it, in the sense that people, they view you, sometimes it's a little bit vain, but they do view you sometimes as how well your teeth look like, and that can determine whether or not you can get a job.
And it's also self-image, it's your ability to speak, and of course if you're walking around with simple dental pain, it's amazing how that can take over everything. I got a toothache, you know, that kind of thing.
But it turns out too that if you have Medicare or Medicaid, it doesn't cover everything. It only covers a certain.
That is quite true. I mean, it's another aspect of healthcare that has to be dealt with. So is that out yet, or it's coming out?
Oh, it came out today.
Came out today. David Cruz, could you find a better guest for the Bronx Buzz? No, you couldn't. David, you're the best. Thank you very much. We got to everything we talked about. Thank you so much. And we will be back with an author who writes about issues that are very, very, very personal to people in the Bronx. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Back with you on the Bronx Buzz. I am really excited about our next guest because, and actually today, on March 14th, this is a very special day for this person and for this publication called Daughters of the Stone. It's a wonderful piece of work, and we're thrilled to have Dalma Llanos Figueroa with us. Nice to have you with us, Dalma. How are you?
I'm fine. A little hoarse, but I am fine and excited about everything.
You are undoubtedly extremely excited about the fact that this book, Daughters of the Stone, is published for national audiences beginning today. Talk to me about the book, the creation of the book, and a little background about it.
Okay, well,
it's a novel, by the way. I would tell people. Yes, go ahead.
The book came about because I'm an Afro-Puerto Rican, and I could never find myself in the literature that was given to me. I was an English major, and I was never represented there, and I was never represented in the media, and there was never an image for me to see. And since I was an English major, and since writing was really important to me, I decided that that vacuum needed to be eliminated and that there needed to be stories about people like me and the people in my community. And so Daughters of the Stone begins in West Africa 150 years ago in the mid-19th century. And then it travels to Puerto Rico for the colonial era during slavery. And then it travels to urban America, pretty much like the history of my family, I guess.
When you take a step back and look at the whole of it, was it the kind of thing that just kind of flowed? In essence, what I'm asking is the very sedentary question of how long did it take to put it all together? Was it the kind of thing that just flowed out of you, or did you really painstakingly, do the research, spend a lot of time with it? And just give us some background about the creation of it.
Okay. Well, I heard a lot of, when I was a kid, I was sent to Puerto Rico to live with my grandmother in rural Puerto Rico because our South Bronx neighborhood was getting a bit dangerous. And while there, I heard a lot of oral history, a lot of storytelling. The women would sit on the porch in the evenings on their rockers, and they would tell stories about everybody and everything. And I just sat and sopped it up. And so that's the beginning of it. I carried those stories around with me. I didn't really think they were anything special until much later when I got to be an adult, and I felt like this is important. This should be written down. And so it did not come in a flash. It wasn't a painstaking outlined narrative. What happened was I started writing little pieces, and eventually I started to see that those little pieces were really chapters in a long story.
Right.
And it took about 15, 20 years because I was teaching full-time, so I could really only write in the summer because anybody who knows a teacher knows when they get home from work, the last thing they want to do
is sit down at a desk and start writing. Yeah.
All I did when I got home was sit down and watch Oprah. But eventually
we won't tell anybody that.
No, you won't tell it. But eventually I realized that these were all pieces of a very long story. And that's how I ended up with a novel. I didn't know I was writing a novel. At first I thought I was writing memoir, these stories that I heard from all these women. But eventually I realized that it really was a much longer piece.
This is part of a kind of a lineage that in a way is going on now in the Bronx. We have the Bronx African American History Project, which was established, at Fordham University. And right now, in fact, tonight is the 14th, and then again on the 21st, there are showings in the Bronx of Decade of Fire, which in essence are the same kind of thing, that these were for want of a better term, folk tales about people's history that have never been documented before. And now, maybe for the first time, we in the Bronx and many of our peoples are reclaiming our history in terms of all of our cultures and the beauty of them and the courage of the people who fought and those kinds of things. So I don't know if you want to address that, but I just wanted to put what you've done in some perspective, that this is what's happening now in the Bronx. We are reclaiming heritage.
Absolutely. And I feel very strongly that there are more stories that have not been told than the ones that have. And so I see myself as someone who gives voice to the voiceless, not because they weren't telling the stories, but because they were never listened to, they were never valued, they were never validated. And now people are just finding all kinds of ways of recording and sharing and insisting on being heard.
Yes, and you know, it comes out in our arts, in our culture. I mean, writing is, of course, an art as well, but in our music and everything, and we're seeing it more and more. Talk to me about, in terms of what the values were that you discovered through those conversations that you had way back with the elders in Puerto Rico, that you wanted to communicate through the novel, and what you hope a reader who reads it will put it down and go, I get this. What are those values?
Well, I think the primary one is that we are all given tradition from our parents, especially if you're an immigrant. But even if you're not, everybody gets handed, let's just say, a treasure chest of traditions. And every generation has to decide what they will adapt and what they will not, because everything changes. So you can't just accept everything piecemeal. But you have to value the strength that you're given, because you're going to need it. So for me, the greatest message is that we have to explore and value the past so that we can prepare for the future and that we can get through the present, no matter how challenging it may be, because we know that we have endured and we will endure.
I'm sorry that I'm still stuck on this image of the girl in Puerto Rico getting these stories and then somehow ultimately realizing that, this really is a dramatic story to tell. The impact, I'm always interested in this, because to me this is what really moves people from one point to the other. The impact of not having those role models and not having those stories told in books that they read in school or whatever else is a very dramatic thing, and it's what helps to keep people down. It helps to keep them from being aggressive about getting what they deserve, those kinds of things. And so I just want to congratulate you of recognizing the importance of self-identity as related to ethnicity, which, of course, to me is one of the leading narratives in the borough of the Bronx for young people right now.
Absolutely. And even though this is a story that's grounded in Puerto Rican history and culture, it is universal because it's happened everywhere. I mean, Italian grandmothers told their children stories about the old country. Indian parents tell their children about their religious faith. It is a story that is universal, and I hope that everybody can reach across cultures and have a great dialogue about what we pass on.
I'm sorry, I have to represent. I grew up in a Jewish household, and my grandparents told me unbelievable stories of how they came to America, how they crossed the borders, how they were processed, through Governor's Island, and those were the tales that gave me a sense of identity of who I was. And it does disturb me, frankly, when I think of young people in the Bronx growing up and not being able to understand that that's who it is. Talk to me a little bit about the book itself, the publication of it, The beauty of the way writing is now and writing books now, you can publish yourself. Talk to me a little bit about, the hard mechanics of putting it out there. Now, I think we've got a picture of the cover of the book, which I'm going to put on the screen if we have that. But tell me a little bit about the process of creating Daughters of the Stone as a publication.
Okay. Originally, Daughters of the Stone came out 10 years ago. Came out, a major commercial house put it out. And then it went out of print. And it was a little engine that could. People were still asking for the book. It has been taught in 15 universities. People kept coming back and saying, where can I get this book? I want to teach it. And so I decided to take my rights and produce a quality paperback edition that is more
affordable, you're allowed to say.
Affordable for librarians
okay,
and
fair
teachers.
enough.
But also eventually there will also be a digital format. But I wanted to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And so I had to find out all about self-publishing and promotion and publicity.
And you're doing great because here you are on Bronx Television talking all about it. Before we run out of
amazing?
Yeah, there you go. I do want to mention before we run out of time, you're working on another novel apparently called A Woman of Endurance.
It is a Woman of Endurance, and you can find out about it. All the readers, all the public can find out about it on my webpage, www.dalmallanosfigueroa.com, and there are excerpts from both Daughters of the Stone and A Woman of Endurance on my website.
And so I'm going to be real greedy. So when are we going to see it? I love the first one. Now I want the second one. When are we going to see that?
Listen,
I'm not pushy.
You'll understand this from your background. You'll understand it when I say, from your mouth to God to your
that's universal. We all understand that. Listen, Dalma Llanos Figueroa, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the release of the paperback version of the book. And folks who want to talk to her and learn more about it, she will be at the Andrew Friedman home tomorrow, Friday the 15th, beginning at 5 o'clock. It's been a thorough joy to have you, and I hope we're going to continue a long relationship so you can tell us all about the great work you're doing. Is she gone?
All your listeners.
Oh, there you go. What were you going to say? Say it. Finish.
I'd love to see all your listeners come down and say
tomorrow.
hello.
That's
tomorrow
great.
Night.
All right, there we go. Thank you so much, Dalma Llanos Figueroa and Daughters of the Stone. And folks, that will wrap up our edition of the Bronx Buzz for tonight. Monday night on Bronx Talk, we will be talking about Freedom Land, a whole different point of view, a little bit about Bronx heritage. And then the week after on Bronx Talk, the borough president will join us, and that will be a very important interview. Good night.